Hello, this is Katerina Nestorenko in the studio with you. Today, here's what we're talking about. Explosions in Crimea. Ukrainian Neptunes are firing at the occupied peninsula. The SBU is destroying S-400 launchers in Novorossiysk. Drones are striking MTS in Samara. The front is ablaze. A breakthrough in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Forced mobilization of Ukrainians in the occupied Luhansk region. Working until the grave. The State Duma proposes that Russians retire 10 years later. A deputy from Milonovsky went through Moscow brothels. General Gerasimov is profiting from the war, and in Italy, a namesake of Maria Zakharova is suffering because of her toxic surname due to EU sanctions. Well then, let's begin. The General Staff of Ukraine has confirmed the strike on the oil refinery in the Samara region. The annual processing capacity of this Novorossiysk oil refinery is 8.8 million tons. And it produces more than 20 types of products that supply the Russian army. On the night of November 16th, explosions and a fire were recorded there. The previous strike on the plant took place on August 28th. The plant's operations were completely halted. The Russians spent a long time restoring the plant after the Ukrainian attack. Well, they had just finished repairs and now it was hit again. Ukrainian drones also flew into Volgograd. There, the Lukoil oil refinery was attacked. But there were some unexpected bonuses as well. The Russian air defense crews tried so hard to fight back that they hit a residential building. As you can imagine, they were shooting things down right over apartment blocks, and that's been their standard practice for a long time now. In fact,
look, the apartment is on fire!
On the night of November 16th, things were also tense in the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea. Locals reported explosions and air defense activity near Sevastopol, in Simferopol, and around the Saki airfield. The Russians complained that it wasn't drones flying at them, but Neptune missiles. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed they destroyed 57 Ukrainian UAVs. As usual, they didn't specify how many they actually shot down. By the way, some good news has come from the SBU. It has become known that the attack on Novorossiysk during the night of November 14th to 15th was extremely successful. Drones from the Alifa Special Operations Center destroyed 4 S-400 Triumf missile system launchers and 2 radars. The air defense missile system launchers were located on the territory of the Kuban Red Banner Regiment's military unit. In total, about 12 S-400 launchers were stationed there, and they may also have been damaged. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of our viewers are from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the Empire of Evil. I always enjoy reading your comments, and in the meantime, we continue. Now comes the most interesting part. Fierce fighting continues on the front line. The Russians keep throwing all their forces to put pressure on the Ukrainian defense. Every day, our soldiers repel up to 100 enemy assaults. According to the Deep State portal, the Russians have made a breakthrough of more than 5 kilometers in the Dnipropetrovsk region. They set up a pontoon crossing between the settlements of Yalta and Dakhne, moving about 10 pieces of equipment across. The enemy managed to concentrate their landing force in the central and southern parts of the village, and they scattered into shelters. For such a breakthrough, as noted by Ukrainian soldiers, the Russians used fog. The enemy entered Novopavlivka. The enemy was detected too late. It is known that at least 2 tanks and 5 armored vehicles were destroyed. The Ukrainian armed forces are repelling the attacks, but it is known that the Russians managed to bring in additional equipment, so the number of enemy troops in the village is significantly higher than just 2 or 3 people. There has also been a recorded enemy breakthrough to Rusin Yar near Kostiantynivka. There too, the fog helped the enemy, but Ukrainian soldiers had previously deployed ground-based robotic systems. During the assault, they detected enemy columns and relayed the coordinates for FPV drones, which destroyed the enemy's equipment. Also, according to Deep State, Ukrainian forces pushed the enemy back near the mine in Donbas. Nevertheless, the occupiers advanced in Vladimirovka near Sofivka in Donetsk region. The Ukrainian defense forces destroyed the road connecting Selidov and Pokrovsk. This disrupted the enemy's logistics. The Russians will no longer be able to use the highway to move light vehicles to Pokrovsk. The situation in Pokrovsk remains difficult. The occupiers continue to infiltrate the urban area. The north remains under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. However, the infiltration of Russian groups continues. In fact, almost the entire territory of Pokrovsk and its surroundings is a gray zone. More details about the situation in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk in the following report.
The Ukrainian army is clearing Pokrovsk of occupiers. Infantry groups are advancing into the eastern part of the city. Additional units are reinforcing positions, establishing new blocking lines, and beginning to clear the neighborhoods. Telegram channels report that the control zones into which Pokrovsk can be conditionally divided are currently separated as follows. The southern and southwestern parts are under the control of the occupiers. The center around the railway is in a gray zone. The north remains under the control of the Ukrainian defense forces.
Both sides are using the weather conditions to rotate their personnel. At the moment, fighting is ongoing in Kroska for control over the industrial zone. This includes the area around the meat processing plant and the feed mill, where the situation is most severe. The Ukrainian defense forces control the area of high-rise buildings, which the occupiers are trying to seize in order to use them as commanding heights to control the logistics of the Ukrainian defense forces.
The situation in Pokrovsk is difficult but not hopeless. The city is under constant attack by the Russian army, which is receiving a worthy response from the Ukrainian armed forces. And here is a living, or rather not so living, example of defense. In these frames, you can see the elimination of the 51st Russian army near Pokrovsk. Relying on the weather conditions, the occupiers felt quite safe, which led to their elimination. Nevertheless, the enemy is planning an offensive with 2 armies from 2 directions on Tryshain, where they intend to meet and close the encirclement. These plans are being thwarted by the Ukrainians, who have no intention of leaving Pokrovsk. The Ukrainian
defense forces have managed to significantly improve their tactical position in the area of Rodinsky, a key logistical hub for Ukraine's defense forces. On the so-called Novorossiysk direction, the occupiers are forced to acknowledge the successful nature of the Ukrainian defense forces' counterattacks aimed at preventing the expansion of the enemy's presence in areas where they have managed to wedge into Ukrainian defenses. From
the north and west, Russian invaders are advancing in the Kupiansk direction. The positions of the defense forces are being attacked by small enemy infantry groups supported by Russian drones, which is the only minor but effective offensive tactic the occupiers have, allowing them to report at least the capture of a street. During
the day, significant progress was made along Dzerzhinsky Street, liberating 7 large buildings.
The Russian tactics in Kupiansk are similar to those in Pokrovsk. Here, the defense forces control about half of the city. The enemy's objective in the Kupiansk direction is to push Ukrainian units from the left bank of the Oskil River, seize the Borova-Izyum-Sviatohirsk-Liman bridgehead, and thereby create a flank for an offensive on Sloviansk. And here is another foreigner, an Iraqi citizen who was captured near Kupiansk by our fighters from the 125th Brigade.
The Russians are disgusting. They treat people with cruelty and beat them. They force people to do things they don't want to do.
Allah, Mohammed Tajil came to Russia on a tourist visa. But, as we can see, in Russia everyone has to fight, even foreign tourists. That's why the man was given several options to choose from: death, prison, or a contract with the Russian armed forces. My
companion asked the Russian soldiers for help to get to the Iraqi embassy in Russia, but they refused him.
In the end, the person in the video got so fed up with the Russians that he ran toward Kupiansk to surrender to the Ukrainians, realizing it was his only chance to survive.
I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of the Ukrainian warriors. They are holding the front and standing up to a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they're watching us. A ceasefire in Ukraine before the spring of 2026 is unlikely. This was stated by Finnish President Alexander Stubb in an interview with the Associated Press.
Honestly, I'm not particularly optimistic about achieving a ceasefire or starting peace talks, at least not this year.
According to him, there are several reasons for this. First, it's the issue of security guarantees for Ukraine. Second, the restoration of the Ukrainian economy. And third, the need for at least some understanding of what to do about Russia's territorial claims. Stubb also emphasized that for peace to become possible, Putin's strategic thinking needs to change. And this can only be achieved in one way, by applying maximum pressure. In his opinion, European leaders and Donald Trump will play a role in this. Do you agree with the Finnish president's opinion? Share your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, in the occupied Luhansk region, the Russians have, for the first time, forced Ukrainian men into compulsory mobilization. They simply took them and are sending them to fight against Ukraine. This was reported by the Luhansk Regional Military Administration.
The Russian Ministry of Defense promised to prepare them exclusively for guarding infrastructure facilities. However, they were immediately sent to training centers. The special training will continue for 2 months. In every administrative territorial unit, military enlistment offices have received a plan for this new form of forced mobilization. And
this is just the beginning. Let me remind you, Moscow has already incorporated the occupied territories into its southern military district. Now they plan to mobilize all Ukrainians there between the ages of 18 and 55. No choice, no chances, no questions. It is obvious that Putin has no intention of ending the war. The dictator's plan is to seize all of Ukraine. The first point of his strategy is the occupation of 7 regions. What exactly has the bloody Russian leader planned? Find out in our report.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
In addition to the regions already occupied, the Russians want to take Kharkiv, Mykolaiv and Odessa regions from Ukraine. And 2026 could become a decisive year, according to foreign affairs analysts. Vladimir Putin will move toward his goal in 3 steps.
If Russia holds on to the 4 regions it has already annexed and adds Kharkiv, Mykolaiv and Odessa, this would effectively cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. Under these conditions, the Kremlin will seek a ceasefire, believing it can move on to the second stage, using economic pressure and political warfare, backed by the threat of a new invasion, to impose control over Kyiv. In the third stage, Russia plans to absorb Ukraine and bring it into its own orbit, similar to what happened with Belarus.
Honestly, after carefully reading and thoroughly considering this particular provision, I immediately and vividly remembered the words of Medinsky, which were said and expressed at one of the meetings with the Ukrainian delegates, with the representatives of Ukraine, that, gentlemen, you could lose 3 more regions. Apparently, such sentiments, such ideas, and such plans really do exist and are present in the Kremlin. This statement, in my opinion, reflects the ongoing mindset and strategic intentions that are currently being discussed and possibly acted upon at the highest levels of the Russian government. This is important because today, as Jack Watling writes, the West, mainly Europe in particular, not to mention the United States, has mostly concentrated its attention on the issue of security guarantees for Ukraine, on issues related to the demilitarized zone, the deployment of troops on Ukrainian territory, peacekeeping forces on Ukrainian territory, and so on. The territorial issue is currently being discussed, which means that various different options for dividing these 3 regions are being carefully considered. I mean, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. In fact, according to the author, this tendency distracts attention from the real issues, diverts valuable resources, and distorts the overall understanding of what will actually happen on the front lines in the coming year, at the very least. The main point is that President Putin, as I have already mentioned, does not agree with this view and is not ready or willing to consider any kind of ceasefire or temporary halt to the ongoing conflict at this time. Not until not only the regions that are already partially occupied are taken, but also 3 new regions are fully captured. Will the objective be achieved?
Europe's indecisiveness, Donald Trump's flirtation with the Kremlin, and the focus on China, all of this only encourages the Russian dictator. Although it's not easy for Russia, it stands its ground. According to analysts' forecasts, it will take a set of measures to topple this colossus with feet of clay. A painful blow to the shadow fleet, to the oil industry of the aggressor country, as well as more weapons and improved training for Ukrainian recruits. At the same time, analysts note that one of Ukraine's main problems today is an insufficient number of infantry.
The problem lies not so much in gathering people off the streets, but in improving the quality and capabilities of training and integrating Ukrainian infantry into combat brigades. Today, more people are serving in the Ukrainian army than at any other point in the war, but the military is unable to prepare its personnel to carry out frontline tasks. To solve this growing problem, Ukraine's new army corps will need to establish brigade rotations and allow stronger units to help train the less prepared ones. About
the fact that one of the reasons the Russians are having success near Pokrovsk is the insufficient number of infantry, Ukrainian analysts have been saying this for a long time. In some positions, soldiers have to spend 100 days or more in incredibly harsh conditions, under constant enemy assaults and shelling. And although recently the focus has been on Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, the grey zone is rapidly expanding in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia directions. There is a threat of occupation looming over Huliapol. From
to the north, a rather formidable and imposing Russian armada is steadily advancing. Well, if serious measures are not taken, and if the defensive structures, the fortifications around the area, are not properly maintained, well, actually, this is the fortified district of Huliapol, it's not just our settlement. If these are indeed constructed to a high standard, then there is a certain chance that the plans of the Russian generals will not be successfully fulfilled. But if not, then the story of Vuhledar, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, and unfortunately Pokrovsk could repeat itself. And again, this is directly related. These events happening there are directly related to the article we discussed, which talks about the occupation of the Zaporizhzhia region and the capture of Zaporizhzhia by Russian forces. This is considered one of the strategic objectives of the upcoming campaign, the campaign of the coming year. Indeed, Huliapol is, without a doubt, one of the most important, I'd say a key and strategic point in the overall defensive system of the Zaporizhzhia region. This particular area plays a vital role in maintaining the stability and security of the region as a whole. In the defensive system of the Zaporizhzhia region, if the situation there develops according to a negative scenario, it means the Russians will be able to establish a kind of bridgehead in the coming weeks to advance their offensive next year.
This winter, British analysts note, could prove decisive. To a large extent, the success of the Russians will also depend on the mood of the Ukrainians.
And while Putin craves war, pursuing his imperial ambitions, ordinary Russians are forced to toil for the military economy. The State Duma has come up with a brilliant solution to raise the retirement age by 10 years. In other words, Russians are now being asked to work until they drop. United Russia Deputy Svetlana Bessarab enthusiastically explained that, in this case, pensions could be doubled. But here are the nuances. The average life expectancy in the Russian Federation in 2023 was almost 73.5 years. Men who are being asked to work until 75, on average, don't even live to see retirement. It seems that working until the end of one's life is now officially trending in Russia. Meanwhile, another State Duma deputy, Milonov, once again went about his business and this time busted a den with transgender people. According to him, he allegedly went there in response to complaints from residents and stumbled upon an improvised gay brothel. In the apartment, there were 2 citizens of Uzbekistan whom Milonov accused of transforming into women and promised to deport them back to their homeland.
By the way, before we move on to the next part, I wanted to take a moment to mention something important that might be helpful for you to know as we continue.
Milonov regularly inspects such establishments. He doesn't say where he gets these shady addresses from. What do you think? Why does a Russian State Duma deputy pay such special attention to the world's oldest profession? The chief of the General Staff of the Russian Army, General Valery Gerasimov, is making a colossal profit from Russia's war against Ukraine. And while ordinary Russians are dying and being maimed, Gerasimov's family is amassing untold wealth.
Corruption, luxury, and cronyism. These are the three pillars supporting the hybrid general, Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov. Compared to his former colleagues, his patron Sergei Shoigu and Shoigu's bagman Timur Ivanov, the scrawny, silent Gerasimov looks as poor as a church mouse. But don't let that fool anyone.
You sit in those expensive, exclusive clubs, enjoying the atmosphere. Meanwhile, your children are out there, truly living it up, having fun, and making all sorts of creative videos for YouTube. Do you really think that you are the true masters of this life, or is it possible that life is actually mastering you?
Gerasimov is the author of the hybrid warfare formula that the Russians tested in Donbass and later in Syria. Since January 2023, he has been appointed commander of the joint grouping of occupation forces in Ukraine. And it's highly unlikely that he's any different from the other armchair generals who send thousands to die on the battlefield and pocket millions for themselves. The only thing that sets the silent Gerasimov apart is his extreme secrecy. He doesn't give interviews and tries to hide all references to his property. But even the scraps of information that the media have managed to find make it clear that this military official lives on much more than just his salary. The official income of the Gerasimov family is a secret. Journalists operate with figures from before the full-scale invasion.
Gerasimov's declaration is deliberately modest. Since 2009, the official income of Gerasimov's wife has been just under 31 million rubles. At the same time, almost a third of this amount was received by the general in 2018. On average, the chief of the general staff earns 2.9 million rubles a year, while his wife earns only slightly more, 167,000 rubles. However, the real estate he owns is worth a completely disproportionate amount of money. Journalists have calculated that the family of the head of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, owns property with a total value between 100 and 150 million rubles. How this was purchased on an annual income of 3 million rubles remains an open question. Was it a gift? Did the state give it as a present? No one knows.
Despite the modest salary of a military official, he managed to acquire an apartment in an elite building not far from the GRU headquarters. At first, the apartment, worth about 50 million rubles, was registered in his wife's name, but later her name disappeared from the registries. The couple also became co-founders of the Afninayevo Developers Association in the village of the same name in the Ramenki district of the Moscow region.
Here they acquired ownership of a cottage at 6 Novaya Street with an area of 554 square meters and a cadastral value of 20 million rubles. And a couple of years later, they finished building a bathhouse of 236.3 square meters. Though it turns out it's not exactly traditional, it even has a real jacuzzi. Gerasimov also owns 2 land plots here, with a total area of 4,313 square meters. The market value of all this property could reach up to 100 million rubles.
However, Valery Gerasimov hardly ever relaxes at the Dacha. It's his son and daughter-in-law who spend time here. Thanks to her photos, we can get an idea of the interior of the military official's apartment. By the way, Gerasimov gave his son a separate apartment as a wedding gift, almost 200 square meters and worth over 30 million rubles. And as a bonus, 2 parking spaces.
Gerasimov is a typical Russian military leader of the Putin era. A murky biography, a lack of professionalism, and no patriotism either. Just endless loyalty and devotion to Putin.
But Valery Gerasimov didn't just provide his whole family with hundreds of square meters of real estate. He found cushy positions for everyone, including nephews and in-laws within the Russian Ministry of Defense system. And his son, Evgeny Valerievich, who works in the main directorate for international and military cooperation, even managed to earn a Hero of the Fatherland medal. Obviously, with all the associated payments and benefits. However, which fronts Evgeny Gerasimov actually fought on is also a big secret, just like the true list of his father's assets.
Finland has deported a former Wagner PMC fighter to Russia. The Finnish border guard deported a man who identified himself as a former Wagner PMC fighter. According to local media, he was detained back in June 2025 in the city of Kaiti after illegally crossing the Russian-Finnish border through a forested area. Immediately after being detained, he requested political asylum. Journalists from Mediazona found out that the detainee is Jaslan Mustakhanov, also known as Evgeny Shpartun with the call sign Canelo. Born in 1992, before the war he had been convicted 6 times for theft and robbery. In November 2023, he was detained again in Omsk on charges of stealing valuables worth 1.7 million rubles, after which he was sentenced to 6 years in a high-security penal colony. At the same time, the man himself claims that he signed a contract with the Wagner Group in March 2022. At that time, he was serving a sentence in a penal colony for another case. Finnish journalists found a video on social media where the detainee appears as the commander of a company in the 433rd Motorized Rifle Regiment and talks about the battles. For Selidovo.
Let us now turn our attention to another example, which will help illustrate the concept from a different perspective.
Recording dated June 30th, he criticizes the Russian army and its command. The Finnish border guard confirmed that the man did indeed participate in combat operations, but refused to disclose any further details. And finally, a story about how a Russian last name can ruin your life, especially if it matches the surname of the mouthpiece of a bloody regime. In Italy, there lives a namesake of Maria Zakharova. And suddenly she found out that having the same last name as the spokesperson of the foreign ministry of the aggressor country is automatically a red flag in all European systems. Let me remind you, Zakharova is under EU sanctions.
Sanctions, lists and pressure, such as economic or political.
For example, her colleagues receive their salaries on time, but Zakharova's namesake gets hers a couple of days later after additional checks. The woman also has problems with money transfers. She tried to open a new account, but the banker's screen immediately lit up red. Check the documents. As a result, no account. She left empty-handed. That's how you live in Italy, planning a peaceful European life, and then Russian notoriety catches up with you, because you carry the toxic surname Zakharova. That's all for now. Please like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you next time.